find a way up there.
The taxis leaving from that stand are driving right by him.
Then we better not miss our ride.
It's been a while since the last major entry to the Ratchet & Clank series. If you don't count the 2016 Ratchet & Clank title, which essentially was a remake of the first game, you'll have to go back to 2013's Into the Nexus, which released for the PS3. Though Ratchet & Clank isn't the only series of its kind to have been put on ice over the years, with PS2 classics such as Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper also being pretty much shelved in exchange for more serious and less cartoony titles. That's all set to change with the release of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. While Insomniac is more popular now for its two PlayStation exclusive Spider-Man games, the studio went back to the Ratchet & Clank universe, well, more like multiverse, for its latest PS5 exclusive. A new Ratchet & Clank game has definitely been a long time coming, and Rift Apart promises to satisfy longtime fans as well as series newcomers. But does the cartoony 3D action formula of the series make for a compelling playthrough today? Well, Rift Apart definitely delivers an enjoyable and fun time, and it proves that there's still a lot of life in the series. But more importantly, it is a game that, much like the recently released Returnal, takes full advantage of the power of the PS5. While Returnal was an excellent showcase of the PS5's capabilities in terms of near instant loading and general performance, it doesn't exactly have the visuals that scream generation leap. That is not the case with Rift Apart. Simply put, the new Ratchet & Clank game might just be the best looking game we've played on a console. Now, we have played lots of visually stunning console titles. Just like last year, there was Final Fantasy VII Remake, The Last of Us Part 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. But while those games looked great, Rift Apart just had them beat in terms of detail. While in other games you might see textures that look a bit off or low quality. Yes, I'm looking at you, Doors of Final Fantasy VII Remake. But in Rift Apart, the level of detail of practically everything in the game's world looks excellent, especially in the fidelity graphics mode, as it features ray tracing and a dynamic 4K resolution. Obviously, this is not a game that goes for a realistic style, so it is a bit unfair to compare it with other games. Not to mention that those games are designed for older hardware. But if you really want a PS5 game with visuals that can truly wow you, this game is it. While having beautiful graphics is great, it shouldn't come at the cost of performance. Thankfully, Rift Apart ran with a smooth 30 FPS with no noticeable drops on the fidelity graphics mode. The game also ran at a stable 60 frames per minute on both the performance and the performance RT modes when I tried them. As for which setting to use, it will depend on if you prioritize frame rate or better graphics, and if you play on a 4K display. If you use a standard full HD screen, Performance RT mode is my recommendation. If you're on a 4K screen though, go for the faster performance mode if you're like me and prefer 60 FPS. My playthrough wasn't exactly smooth sailing throughout though, as I experienced some bugs and crashes in my time with the game, though a lot of these should be fixed with the day one patch. Aside from having stunning visuals and a stable frame rate, Rift Apart also has pretty much no loading times thanks to the SSD. But that's not the only way that the game takes advantage of the SSD. In Rift Apart, there are rifts throughout the various worlds which you can use to instantly teleport to a new position, or even to a new level seamlessly. There's even a world where you shift between different dimensions to traverse obstacles. This kind of seamless shifting between levels is simply not possible in past consoles, making this game an excellent showcase of the capabilities that future PS5 games may have. Even on its own, this game's dimension hopping is just straight up cool. What's also cool is the implementation of the DualSense controller. Rift Apart's use of haptic feedback is almost to the level of Astro's Playroom, as you can even feel the difference in texture of which surface Ratchet, or Rivet, is walking through. Along with this, Rift Apart also takes advantage of the controller's adaptive triggers. For instance, pressing the R2 button halfway lets you shoot the shotgun weapon once, while pressing it fully will unload a flurry of shots. There's even a pulsing feedback that you feel when pressing the R2 button fully to fire the blaster pistol on full auto. The game's use of the DualSense features definitely helped enhance our experience, but they can feel a bit too much at some points, especially the adaptive triggers. While the constant resistance on the triggers didn't tire me out, I can see how people may get tired or get finger cramps when playing it for hours. Thankfully, the game allows you to tone down the level of haptic feedback and adaptive trigger resistance in the settings. This is actually just one of the many settings that you can tweak in the game, as Rift Apart has a ton of accessibility options and is still one of the better games to get for players with different needs.
What was that?
Seismic activity, perhaps caused by the crumbling barriers between dimensions.
Finally, Rift Apart also makes use of 3D audio when using compatible headphones. The game's implementation of 3D audio is great, so much so that we recommend playing the game with headphones on. Given that the game is not exactly challenging though, having 3D audio wasn't really a must-have for combat, unlike Returnal and Demon's Souls, both of which were challenging games where we relied on 3D audio to help locate enemies. For gameplay, Rift Apart plays similarly to Ratchet Clank 2016, in that players face off a variety of enemies while equipped with a wide array of weapons. The core gameplay loop is pretty simple. Just go through a level, defeat enemies, solve some puzzles, and beat the level's boss. While this loop is straightforward, it is a lot of fun thanks to the creative mix of weapons available. While players start off with a basic pistol, their arsenal quickly increases to over a dozen unique weapons as the game progresses, all of which can be upgraded. From a more standard shotgun to a topiary sprinkler that turns enemies to plants, and even a gun that shoots drill bots at enemies, the various weapons in Rift Apart are unique and feel great to use. As you play, you'll likely find yourself sticking to certain weapons that fit your playstyle, but you will have to switch to other weapons, especially when your ammo runs out and there are still enemies in the field. You'll also have to switch weapons for certain enemies, as some guns are more effective against certain foes. Speaking of enemies, there's a good amount of mob variety in the game, though that can't be said for the bosses. Every world or level in the game has a big boss fight, though a lot of these fights can feel rather samey, especially as some later bosses are mostly just reskins of a previous boss encounter. In this way, it's kind of similar to the numerous troll bosses in God of War 2018. It also doesn't help that Rift Apart is a fairly easy game, at least at the standard difficulty setting, meaning some later boss fights are rather forgettable given that they don't offer much resistance. Even if the game's on the easy side and the core gameplay loop is rather simple, Rift Apart's combat is still fun and engaging. It also helps that there are some side levels that offer a nice change of pace. These levels include some Clank puzzle solving as well as a cute combat hacking minigame. As for the game's levels, Rift Apart's level design isn't a big departure from the previous Ratchet Clank game. Most of the game's worlds have fairly linear maps that aren't the biggest in scope, except for one particular world with a larger area to explore. Each of the worlds also have various collectibles to complete, which encourages exploration. While most worlds have unique traversal mechanics, I did find that the game having only 9 worlds to explore, not counting a certain level, makes the game feel a bit small, especially as the 2016 Ratchet Clank game had 12 planets to visit. While it may not have as many planets as the 2016 game, Rift Apart does have the clear edge on the previous Ratchet & Clank game when it comes to story. The 2016 remake had a story that suffered from having to tie into the Ratchet & Clank movie, making for a narrative that felt disjointed for most of our playthrough. That is not the case in Rift Apart, as the game's story is solid and flows quite well. It also has a lot of heart, especially as the new characters introduced in the game are quite a lovable bunch. Of course, the highlight is Rivet, Ratchet's dimensional counterpart, who adds a fresh perspective, especially as you play as her for around half the game. Though aside from Rivet, there's also a memorable new character that also stole several scenes for me, but I won't spoil who that is just yet. Admittedly, we haven't played all of the older Ratchet & Clank games, so I can't fully tell if Rift Apart fully captures the spirit of the original games in terms of story. Still, we thought this story was definitely an entertaining ride. So, does Rift Apart prove that the Ratchet & Clank formula still works today? Absolutely. Insomniac Games did a terrific job in making a game that takes advantage of the PS5's power, all while having engaging gameplay as well as a lovely story filled with charming characters. Sure, the scope could have been bigger, and it could have used a little bit more boss variety, but Rift Apart's strengths along with its sheer fun factor heavily outweigh the shortcomings. Overall, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart greatly shows off the capabilities of the PS5, making it highly recommended for owners of the console. More than that though, Rift Apart shows that the 3D action formula of Ratchet & Clank still has a lot of life left in it. We hope you enjoyed this review, and do let us know what you think of the game down in the comments below. Till next time everyone, keep on gaming.